We're going to cover lessons 48 and 49 in this lesson, and I'm just going to be real upfront with you. This is a strange lesson. The math of this is not hard, but it's a little bit weird. So don't get bogged down in it. Stay with me and let's work our way through it. Before we kind of jump into the lesson, I want to back up and talk about absolute value and what it is, and kind of be reminded of a couple of things. So first of all, these two lines on either side of the number mean the absolute value. Technically, what the absolute value is on a number line, how many places from the origin, which is the 0, the number is. So if I, 1, 2, 3, 4, draw a -4 on a number line, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 places from 0. So the absolute value of -4 equals 4. Now I need to take a second and show you something, because there's another way to get 4 with an absolute value. The absolute value of -4 is 4. The absolute value of +4, 1, 2, 3, 4, is also 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can get the same answer from two different inputs. I can have two different problems that produce the same answer. The absolute value of -4 equals 4. The absolute value of +4 equals 4. Now keep that information kind of tucked in your back pocket for a few minutes when we start talking about solving inequalities with absolute values. A long while ago in math, we did problems like this. That's not what I meant to write. Okay. Absolute value of x equals 3. And the reality is we can have x equals 3, and we could have -x equals 3. And we had to have a negative and a positive in order to solve this problem. Now, when we change that equal sign to an inequality, a greater than or a less than, and I have the absolute value of x is less than 3, the rules change a little bit, okay? So what this means is, and the rules don't really change, they're going to write things a little bit differently. X is less than 3, but it also means -x is less than 3. Now here is the problem. -x, to solve, this translates to x is greater than -3, because technically there's an understood -1 here. To get rid of it, I move it over here. When I move it over there, I'm going to divide by a negative, and when I do that, the operation changes. Now, so what I technically have is x is less than 3 and or x is greater than -3. Now, these expressions, when we are talking about less than problems, we are going to write this as an AND statement. And the way that we're going to do that, we're going to say that x is going to go in the middle. X is less than 3 and x is greater than -3. So x is going to be written like this in one statement. X is going to go in the middle. X is greater than -3. X is less than 3. And this is weird, okay? And I'm not really sure why we have to write it this way, but every math class I've taken writes less thans this way. If I invented this, my answer would say x is greater than -3 or x is less than 3. But they write it sort of all-inclusively. And if I read this from the x, if I read this direction, what it's saying is x is greater than -3. If I read it from the x this direction, it's saying that x is less than 3. So what I'm doing is I'm writing this information all together. I'm just kind of writing it as one sentence. And we're going to do a couple of these with the less than symbol. Let's just look at another one. This is the classwork number 1 in your textbook from lesson 48. And your textbook explains a way to do this that I find very confusing. I was never able to work these this way the first round that I did it. I still get confused doing it now. And so what I'm going to have you guys do is do it a little bit differently than the textbook. We're going to just rewrite this into 2 problems because of the fact that we have absolute value. We talked a bit before. When we have an absolute value, we need the positive of that absolute value, that's your understood, and we need the negative of that absolute value, because remember, there was a negative or a positive inside the absolute value spit out the same answer. So we're going to break this into 2 problems. Your textbook does that, but it kind of writes it a little bit differently, and it just is confusing to me. Okay, so we're going to write this with a positive version and a negative version, and then we're going to solve both. So let's solve our less than first. I'm going to move my x terms. Don't forget that's an understood plus. So 5x minus x is 4x. I need to move that 4 over. When I do so, it's going to become division, 12 divided by 4. So x is less than 3. That's my first piece of this problem. Now I'm going to solve this one with the negative term there. Positive, understood positive x moves over, becomes minus. Negative 5x minus x is negative 6x. Don't lose the understood 1. Now, on this one, I am going to move my negative 6 over, and I'm going to divide by a negative, not a negative 2. I am going to divide by a negative 6. When I divide by a negative 6, the sign flips, and what I have is x is greater than negative 2. So we have 2 sets of information. We have x is less than 3 or x is greater than negative 2. That is the correct information, but we have to learn to write it in the right format. And there's sort of this equation that we're going to use. Negative b, x is going to go in the middle, to positive b. And actually, I think the equation, and I can check in your textbook, but I think the equation that's a typical equation is a. And in this case, a is going to be the variable. And you just write it from the negative side to the positive side. So here's my negative. My variable in this case is x. And then my positive is 3. And this is the correct format for your answer. Remember, this is for less than. Negative, less than x, less than 3. Negative to positive. Okay, let's look at one more. So let's walk through this one, and this one has one little extra bit because inside of my absolute value sign I have multiple pieces. So I'm going to make sure when I drop my absolute value sign with a negative and a positive set that I put it in parentheses, because that negative and that positive need to sort of stick to everything that's inside of that absolute value sign. So there's my plus, or my positive one. Here is my negative one. Remember, we have to do a positive and a negative because they both spit out the same answer. And now I'm going to just walk through each of these and solve them. When I distribute a plus, understood 1, remember, don't forget there's understood 1 there. When I distribute a plus 1 in, it changes nothing. So basically, those parentheses can just go away. Now I'm going to add any like terms, and here I have 5 plus 7. So 2 plus 12 is less than 18. Move my positive or my plus 12 over. Oh, I dropped my x. Move my plus 12 over. When I do that, it becomes 18 minus 12, which is 6. So I have 2x is less than 6. Move my 2 over. I'm going to divide, but I'm dividing by a positive, so the symbol does not change. 6 divided by 2 gives me x is less than 3. There's my first piece. Now distribute this negative to both pieces, and I get negative 2x minus 5. Remember, there's technically an understood 1 there. Negative 1 times 2 is a negative 2. Negative 1 times 5 is negative 5. Move my 7 over. Nope, I'm not going to move that 7 over yet. I got a step ahead of myself. Sorry. Add my like terms. Negative 5 plus 7 is going to be 2. Now I'm going to move that 2 over. 18 minus 2 is 16. Oh gosh, I dropped my x again. Now I'm going to move my negative 2 over. When I move that over, I'm dividing, and I am dividing by a negative. So my sign flips. Negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. And so remember, the way I write this is from negative to positive. Negative 8, x, positive 3. Write it from negative to positive, and that's the answer for these, okay? That negative to positive rule is for less than. The greater than changes. All right, this one looks like the one we did before, except that this one is greater than. That says greater than. It's written terribly. It's late and I'm tired. Sorry. If it's greater than, we are still going to split it up, but in this case, we have one positive, we have one negative, and because we worked these a few minutes ago, I'm not going to take the time to work all the way through it. They're the exact same problems. The only difference is that the sign has changed. The inequality has flipped directions. So what we're going to do is we're going to end up with x is greater than 3, and we're going to end up with x is less than negative 2. Now, when it is greater than, the answer is the one that makes a little bit more sense. When it is less than, we do the negative x or negative to the positive. When it is greater than, the answer is simply or. Solve them, and it's x is greater than negative 3 or x is less than negative 2. Okay? So, let's look at one more. And here's the same one we did a few slides ago. The difference is it's greater than. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to split it into the positive. Remember, when you have more than one thing inside of that absolute value sign, put it in parentheses. And then you have the negative version of it. And then you're going to walk through, just like we did before, and solve for x. And because we've already done the work, I'm going to skip ahead. And what you're going to end up with, on the positive version of this, you end up with x is greater than 3. On the negative version of this, you end up with x is less than negative 8. And because it is greater than, your answer is x is greater than 3 or x is less than negative 8. Okay? So Less than, you go from negative to positive. Greater than, you have the or in there. There's a couple of special cases we need to look at. So one thing that I don't think that I told you this before. When you have an absolute value, move this over first. Get the absolute value by itself. I know we did not do that before, but we need to get the absolute value by itself first, and I'll show you why. I don't know what my brain was thinking. Well, you can do it that way, but this way is going to possibly save you some time. I look like a 7, or look like a, I don't know what that looked like. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. Now listen, this is a special case. If we think logically here, the absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. The absolute value of 30 is 30. The absolute value of negative 21 is 21. There is never a case that you will end up with a negative answer to an absolute value. Ever. It will never happen, because the absolute value is how many places the number is from the origin. And you're just counting. Direction doesn't matter. So when you have an absolute value that is a negative less than, a negative less than, it's going to be another one of these no solutions. Like, there's mathematically no way to solve that. Last week in class we talked, that's a U, not an A. I'm trying to talk and write at the same time. Solution. Last class, or last face-to-face time, we talked about you can't divide anything by 0. It doesn't work. You cannot solve it. When you have a negative less than absolute value, it's unsolvable. The answer is no solution. Negative less than means no solution. Now, on the other side of that, let's look at this problem. Let's move this over. This is a negative greater than. And we can stop working here, because the absolute value of anything can never be negative. We just talked about that. And here is the textbook definition. The answer to a greater than negative absolute value is all real numbers. Basically what that means is any real number will make this a true statement. Now, that may not make a whole lot of sense. I'll be honest, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to my brain. Because the absolute value of all real numbers is positive. Therefore, they're greater than any negative number. Okay, just know, if it is a negative less than, it's no solution. If it is a negative positive, the answer is all real numbers. And this textbook hasn't worked with that idea of real numbers yet. I don't really like the fact that they've put that in here, but they have at this state. So I'm showing it to you because occasionally you are going to have an absolute value that's going to give you a negative. I don't know why, with, that shouldn't say positive. I've got myself confused. A negative greater than. Negative greater than, the answer is all real numbers. Negative less than, the answer is no solutions. Let me kind of organize all this information. You're going to want to write this down somewhere in some note form to be able to access. So the way you solve absolute values is to break them into absolute value inequalities, is to break them into their negative and positives and to solve them. Here's what you need to remember about your answer forms. If it is less than, x is less than, then you're going to use this pattern where you go from your negative to your positive. If it is greater than, and I'm trying to If it is greater than, that's when you're going to use your or. X is less than or X is greater than. If when you are working it, you end up with an absolute value of something that is less than a negative answer, if it is less than, the answer is no solution. There is no number that's going to be an absolute value. There's no number of an absolute value that's going to be a negative number. Never, ever, ever. If it is greater than, though, you have an x that is absolute value of x that is greater than something, then anything that is bigger than 0 is going to give me an answer. And I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but your answer is going to be all real numbers. Oh, that's not how you spell real. All real numbers. So break into the positive, put anything in parentheses, break into the negative, put anything in parentheses, solve it. If you end up, if it is a less than, this is the format that you're going to need to use. If it is a greater than, use the or format. If you end up with an answer less than negative, the answer is no solution. If your answer is greater than a negative, the answer is all real numbers. Your homework is going to be activity 2 and 3 on lesson 49. I don't have the page numbers. Again, my book numbers don't match your books. There's not a huge amount of problems there. I do want you to be aware of the fact that in about a week and a half, well, not next week, but the following week is going to be a week of all review. So we'll come back and see all of these things again, and then a test will be 3 weeks from now. So activity 2 and 3, lesson 49. Let me know if you have questions.